Hello and welcome or welcome back. In this video, we're going to examine serious issues in biblical prophecy, specifically concerning what many call the end times or Jesus' return. For centuries, various interpretations have dominated this discussion, often creating confusion or a sense of perpetual waiting. But what if I told you that the Bible itself provides clear, undeniable answers that point to a fulfillment nearly 2,000 years ago? And what if the prophecies about Jesus' coming, the resurrection, and the judgment weren't about our distant future, but about a pivotal event in the first century? This is called a preterist perspective. The prophesied return of Jesus, the resurrection, the judgment, and the close of the Old Covenant age, along with the inauguration of the New Covenant kingdom, were all fulfilled in AD 66 to 70, with the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple. So let's unpack this using only what the Bible plainly states, with explicit time markers, 101 of them, that express prophesied end-time events as near, about to be, at hand, in this generation, and those things to occur in the lifetimes of Jesus' contemporaries. Our first and perhaps most powerful point comes from the sheer volume of these explicit time markers and statements of imminence throughout the New Testament. Listen to Jesus' own words in Matthew 24:34. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. And again in Matthew 16:27 to 28, he said, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Jesus was speaking to his contemporaries, promising these events would happen within their lifetime, within their generation. This wasn't a solitary statement. The apostles echoed this urgency. The book of Revelation, for example, is filled with phrases like must shortly take place. I am coming quickly. Surely I am coming quickly. That's from Revelation 22:6 and 7, verses 12 and 20 as well. Now consider these other examples. Romans 13:11 to 12, quote, and do this, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. The night is far spent and the day is at hand. In Philippians 4:5 we read, the Lord was at hand. Also in James 5:7-8 we read, the coming of the Lord was at hand. 1 Peter 4:7, quote, the end of all things was at hand. And Hebrews 10:37, for yet a little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. 1 John 2:18 declares it is the last hour. Now, these aren't vague predictions. These numerous emphatic time statements from Jesus and his apostles collectively demand a first century fulfillment. To push these events thousands of years into our future would frankly render these inspired time indicators meaningless. Beyond the time frames, the Bible describes specific events that align perfectly with the AD 70 judgment. Jesus in Matthew 23 condemned the scribes and Pharisees, promising desolation to the house of Israel in their generation. Matthew 24 then goes on to detail the destruction of the temple itself. Moses in Deuteronomy 28, as well as history, tells us this was fulfilled with devastating precision by the Roman legions. So now let's look at Daniel 12, verses 1 and 2, which speaks of a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation. Now, this prophecy was traditionally understood to be future, but it is linked directly to the unparalleled suffering during the Roman siege of Jerusalem from AD 66 to 70. The Jewish historian Josephus, an eyewitness, describes horrors that indeed match this description, a time of unprecedented tribulation. Daniel goes on to mention the deliverance of everyone who was found written in the book, which is seen as the salvation of Christian believers who heeded Jesus' warning to flee Judea. Furthermore, Daniel 12:7 connects these events to the, quote, shattering of the power of the holy people. This was the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in AD 70, which marked the definitive end of the Old Covenant Jewish nation's religious and political authority. The convergence of these specific prophetic elements with the historical events of AD 70 provides a clear, verifiable fulfillment within the specified time frame. Now, many envision Jesus coming as a physical bodily descent from the sky, but let's examine the biblical language. Matthew 24:30 speaks of the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. This is not a physical return to earth, but as a judicial, spiritual coming in judgment. This is symbolic language common in the Old Testament prophecies where God comes on the clouds to judge nations, as seen as in Isaiah 10 and 19 concerning Babylon and Egypt. The AD 70 judgment on Jerusalem is seen as this specific, powerful coming in judgment against a disobedient generation. The gathering of the elect, mentioned in Matthew 24:31, is understood as the ingathering of believers into the new covenant kingdom as the old system was abolished. It also points to the spiritual resurrection out from the dead in Sheol, both of the righteous and unrighteous, to receive reward or condemnation. This interpretation aligns Christ's coming with consistent Old Testament prophetic imagery of divine judgment, making it entirely consistent with the AD 70 event. Now, understanding the covenantal shift is crucial. The New Testament repeatedly speaks of an end of the ages. 1 Corinthians 10:11 states that the end of the ages had come upon them. And Hebrews 9:26 says Christ appeared once at the end of the ages. This refers to the end of the Mosaic or Old Covenant age and the full establishment of the New Covenant. Similarly, 1 Corinthians 7:31 and 1 John 2:17 speak of the form of this world passing away, and the world is passing away. This world in Greek is cosmos and aeon, and it's often understood as the Old Covenant system and its structures, which were then in their final moments. The AD 70 destruction marked the definitive end of the Old Covenant age, both physically and spiritually, making way for the full realization of the New Covenant. Finally, let's address the concept of resurrection and judgment. Daniel 12:2 says, "And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt." This is metaphorically a spiritual resurrection or a reawakening connected to the transition from the Old Covenant age, which was characterized by spiritual death, to the New Covenant age of spiritual life. It speaks to the covenantal shift and the spiritual awakening that accompanied the establishment of the kingdom. Similarly, passages like John 12:31, "Now is the judgment of this world," and 1 Peter 4:5, "Christ was ready to judge the living and the dead." And these are connected directly to the AD 70 events, which judged the unfaithful Jewish nation and ushered in the new covenant. So the resurrection and judgment are understood within the context of the covenantal transition and the spiritual realities established by Christ's first coming and the events of AD 70, rather than a singular future physical event for all people at once. Now let's consider why futurist interpretations lack explicit biblical grounding for their future predictions. If, as is foretold, the major prophecies concerning Jesus' coming, the end of the age, and judgment were fulfilled in AD 70, then futurists must posit a different second coming for which there are simply no additional distinct prophecies given after AD 70. Instead, futurists are seen as reinterpreting the same prophecies that were already fulfilled. But they struggle to reconcile the overwhelming imminence language, this generation quickly at hand, with the future fulfillment thousands of years later. Futurist interpretations often require a figurative understanding of soon or a gap theory that lacks explicit textual support and contradicts the plain reading of the time statements. Now, consider this quote from preterist apologist Morrison Lee carefully, quote, "All true knowledge is a reliable acquaintance with facts, and all biblical knowledge is an acquaintance with true biblical facts by observation. A thing cannot be said to be biblical unless there are observable biblical statements in the same terms to declare it so. Thus, the only objective measure of biblical reality is a correspondence of statement with biblical fact in the same terms. For example, the statement John is 6 feet tall is true if and only if a measuring tape determines his height from sole to the crown of his head is at 6 feet. For a future return of Jesus beyond AD 70, whatever several reasons, there must be specific biblical evidence and that means scripture that specifically points to the future event. The problem for futurists here is that there is no such specific evidence. Jesus' parousia coming in AD 66 to 70 is the only coming prophesied in scripture. All else future is mere presupposition, weakly supported by proof text only. So many futurist interpretations fail to fully appreciate the profound significance of the Old Covenant's demise and the New Covenant's establishment as the fundamental backdrop for these prophecies. This leads them to project events meant for the first century transition into our distant future. Futurism relies on denominational creeds and presuppositions rather than direct, explicit biblical prophecies for a future coming that is clearly distinct from the 80-70 event. Futurists assume a future event and then try to fit biblical passages to it rather than letting the text speak for themselves about a first century fulfillment. The scriptural passages we've examined in this video strongly support the preterist argument that the central eschatological prophecies concerning Jesus' return, judgment, and the end of the Old Covenant age found their fulfillment in the profound events surrounding the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. To truly grasp this, we must emphasize the unmistakable and consistent time indicators throughout the New Testament that point to an imminent first century fulfillment. We see direct correlation between the prophetic language and the historical events of AD 66 to 70, particularly the destruction of the temple and the associated tribulation. And we point to the profound covenantal framework that sees these events as the final dismantling of the Old Covenant system and the full inauguration of the new. The strength of the preterist position lies in its ability to take the biblical author's words at face value, respecting their immediate context and the consistent imminence of the prophesied events. It challenges us to read Scripture with fresh eyes, to see what was promised, and to recognize its powerful historical fulfillment. Now, I'm going to end here. Please post your comments down below. And if you haven't, please favor me by subscribing to the channel. Thank you.